Hey, there it is. All right, cool. All right. Howdy, everybody. Super excited to have this conversation today with Heath. As we get into, we'll do intros in just a second, but as a quick heads up for those of you who do not know or have not used Zoom at this point, which is probably nobody, if you want to ask a question, you've got the option within chat. As you can see on my screen here, in the lower bar of your Zoom window, you've got the option to jump in there. You can ask a question to all attendees, and we'll try to roll your question in as kind of just a part of the discussion as we're going through and having our conversation today. Or if you want to specifically flag Julia or Lauren, who are on the team, you can select to chat directly to them where you see that kind of all panelists. You can select them directly and send them a note, and then they can vocalize your question for you, whichever way you prefer to do it. That being said, for those of you that don't know, I am Chris Yoko, CEO of Yoko CO. We are a organization that helps organizations that have a passion or purpose beyond just profit leverage the tool that gives them the greatest amount of leverage and reach, which is their web presence, to build a better world. And through all of this COVID stuff, we were excited to learn that we won Washington Journal's Best Places to Work, which is very exciting. And then everything shut down, and it's just been I'm desperate to play hockey. That's basically what it comes down to. But enough about me. I'm super excited to introduce Heath Renfro from our partner, the Crypsis Group. We're going to get into some really cool stories that I'm looking forward to hearing. But one is just Heath has a slew of stories in history as far as cybersecurity, over 2 decades of information security across both public and private sectors. So he's got some great stories he's going to tell us there. And then I was interested to learn that I also want to hike the AT from beginning to end, maybe not all at one go. It sounds like you want to do it all in one go. But Heath, welcome aboard and thanks for being here.
Yeah, Chris, thank you. And I think I need to get a cool picture like you have. My picture is just not doing me any justice after seeing your picture. So
I think you've got a good one. But one of the things we're supposed to be doing a webinar at some point with Tim Coburn, who is our headshot photographer. So he does some great work. So I'll let you know when that one happens. He'll give you all the good tips.
Awesome.
But yeah, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here just so we can get into the conversation. Let's get into it. So obviously with everything going on with the way changes have been accelerating in the world in general, information security has become more and more important. I think that's only complicated by the fact that, kind of COVID has hit and has served as a catalyst for acceleration of adoption of a lot of technologies, people working remotely, a lot of things that are all kind of just happening to coincide and conflate together right now. Based on where things are at, I guess just kind of first, would you agree that this has kind of been a accelerant in terms of information security and awareness? And then we'll do a step back, do a little bit of background on you, and then get into some interesting stories.
Yeah, Chris, it has been an accelerant. You have a lot of these corporations and these companies that built these big buildings, and they have all their employees in these buildings, and everybody's got their desktops and their laptops, and everybody comes in, works in the office, and all of a sudden overnight, everybody needs to work from home. And, a lot of companies just weren't prepared for that, not from a logistical standpoint, only from an IT perspective, but what are the security risks that was going to bring to the table? And how were the cyber criminals to start taking advantage of that? And we have certainly seen the cyber criminal element taking advantage of that situation in the remote world. And I think we're going to be looking at a remote workforce from here on out. You've seen a lot of very large companies coming out and saying, we're never going to bring anybody back to the office. They're seeing the benefits of remote work, and there are a ton. I mean, I know the companies, I've been working remotely for the last, 5-6 years, and they get more out of me. I'm not driving an hour into work. I'm not driving an hour after work. I'm waking up, getting my coffee, and coming straight into the office and working. And then as my wife knocks on the doors, and she goes, "You realize it's dinner time now. It's time to come inside." Come out from the inn, or one of those movies, In and Out, I think is what it was. But so we have definitely seen an accelerant when it comes to cybersecurity risk, and organizations are scrambling right now, trying to catch up and to be able to plug those gaps.
Yeah, I think it's kind of, I think everyone just across work and everyone, especially our clients, we've seen really just kind of struggling to deal with it. And like you said, let alone acclimate to working remotely and all the impact that has on culture. it's really easy to take your eye off the ball in terms of information security and just trying to make sure you're buttoned up. And that was why I was super interested to have you on board. So let's take a step back, give some people some context. I'd love for you to just kind of share a little bit of your history and kind of professional background in terms of the world of information security. And then we'll jump in to try to give people watching some really actionable advice about what to do to, best be prepared, how to prevent things, what to do if something does happen. I mean, you've got experience on kind of all sides of this. So I'd love to just be able to help use, all that stuff you've got in your brain to help other people make the most of what can be a tricky situation.
Yeah, Chris, great. I'm a Texan, so I have a tendency to talk a little long-winded, so I'll try not to talk about myself too much. I've been doing information security, information assurance, cybersecurity, whatever the flavor of the week is, and what they want to call it, since I was 18 years old when I joined the United States Navy. So 23 years now. I've been working in the information assurance space. Young kid, 18 years old, had no idea what I was going to be doing when I went into the Navy, and little did I know the path that it would lead me on, and it's been extremely exciting. I was active duty Navy for 9 years. After that, I went into the government civilian ranks within the Department of Defense, and I was the Chief Information Security Officer or the Chief Security Officer for various organizations within the Department of Defense. Up till 2017, when I left my last CISO role with the Department of Defense, where I was in charge of Army healthcare, which is 48 hospitals, over 600 health clinics, 120,000 personnel. I had a little over 1,200 cybersecurity professionals underneath me in the CISO office. So vast organization, global organization, complex, healthcare, critical, lots of threats, nation threats, and many other things out there. So it was I did not get this gray until I got that healthcare job. So, but it was an adventure and I loved it. Some people might not believe this. The public sector doesn't pay as well as the private sector. And finally, I gave into the private sector, and I went to a cybersecurity startup where I was a virtual chief information security officer for various industries out there, mainly the credit union space. Loved it, was great, but I was with a cybersecurity startup, and they started to struggle. And then the Crypsis group came calling, and I got to be part of this company now it was built around incident response. So we're the people you call to come in after somebody's caused some problems with you and the cyber criminals have attacked you. But we built this risk management practice and this proactive practice to be able to help clients build out and mature their cybersecurity programs before a breach, or sometimes we come in after the breach has occurred and say, okay, this has happened. Let's find out where all the gaps are. Let's try to sit there and plug those gaps and do that. So it's been extremely exciting. I got here in January 2020. Been great. Loved it. It is exciting to see everything that comes through. And it's also sad. We see on a daily basis, case after case after case for incident response, ransomware attacks, business email compromises, fraud, insider threats. And it's exciting when you work in the field, but it makes you sad to see some of these companies, the way they're attacked and taken advantage of by these cyber criminals and what they have to go through. We feel for our customers greatly, and we continue to try to educate and help them get a line of defense to be able to prevent these situations from happening again.
Absolutely. Well, I can't even imagine, coming in bright-eyed, bushy-tailed in January, like, all right, I have kind of an idea of what might be ahead of us, and then sudden left turn, and certainly an explosion of activity in terms of what we've seen here. One of the things that I think is super interesting about your history is I feel like, and maybe you'll agree with this, but growing up alongside the technology very early, I feel like in retrospect gives you a lot of ability to understand at a greater level of depth kind of how different types of attacks, vulnerabilities, et cetera, work. In the same way, I thought the generation growing up like with iPads and phones and stuff now would be technology wizards. And what I'm learning is at least most of like my siblings, cousins, friends, nephews, nieces, et cetera, don't know how that stuff works. They're just like, yeah, you click the button and it works. And they don't understand any of the underlying technology because they didn't have to use all of the underlying technology. So there's this big kind of missing gap in how X might cause Y to happen that I feel like people like us are kind of fortunate to have grown up with. And I'd just be interested in, what have you seen, or what have you noticed to change that's either surprised you most, or you just think most people maybe have taken for granted from being in the space 23 years and thinking about how information moved differently back then to, how it moves around now?
I think the greatest change I've seen, I go, old school, 1997, technology was, what it was. And we've grown tremendously through that. But I think what people fail to realize nowadays is how much technology is involved in their lives. They're just not seeing it. You look at your cars, not just Tesla, but just about any car. It has some kind of smart technology in it. And the risks are associated with that. I mean, it's been demonstrated many times by different ethical hackers how they can sit there and go through the OnStar system or the onboarding system and control the brake pads and manipulate the car's speed. And there's so many risks with that. And, we're struggling. I struggle with my kids' social media, and the risks are coming that from a privacy perspective. But you walk through these houses and you see the smart meters, to be able to control their air and temperature, and you got the Ring technology on their door systems, and how much they're actually, this technology, the criminal element is taken advantage of. It's trying to look at ways to sit there and be able to exploit you from physical intrusion standpoint now.
Right.
You walk by, and one thing I tell all my neighbors, I'll go by their houses throughout the the neighborhood sometimes and tell them, you should take down your home alarm system. Don't take that ADD sign down. So, and they look at me funny. I was like, well, and I give them a story that, I have somebody that, is now on the right side of the law, but they were on the wrong side of the law at one time. And they would go around and look at those signs, do some research, figure out how to bypass it from all the online technology and solutions they had, and be able to bypass your alarm because they knew what they were looking for specifically before they targeted your house. So we're just looking at a mass explosion in technology and online presence, especially going to remote workforce. I mean, you talk about Zoom. Zoom has had its challenges in the news. I'm sure we've all heard that, and continue to define and redefine things. But it's the risk that people don't realize with that phone, for example, the downloading an app after app. I want to play this game. I want to play this game. And the potential risk they're bringing into their banking information being stolen, their personal information being stolen, and just that not understanding just how complex and sophisticated the criminal elements are now.
Absolutely. I feel like it's embarrassing to think about, like, the things that trained us as children. But I remember in middle school, like, you try to download a game off like a Napster or a LimeWire or something, and you'd be like, all right, this is the only computer we have in the whole house. If this crashes the computer, my parents will kill me. I've got to be really well prepared. And then you bring that paranoia into like the app store, and you're like, I'm not downloading anything because I know, what kind of things it can compromise or what kind of performance impact it can have on your device, regardless of what it might be. But what I think is interesting in what you're kind of hinting at is I can guess what the answer might be, but despite all the change in technology, what have you seen kind of stay constant as far as like issues with information security?
I hate to say this because I've been in the space for 23 years, and I like to think that I've made some type of impact. It is still a lack of true understanding from executive leadership, from a business perspective, of understanding the importance of information security. It's still looked at an IT issue, and I will tell you, cybersecurity is not an IT issue.
Right, it permeates everything.
It permeates everything, and it's across the board. And we're trying as cybersecurity professionals to be able to bridge that gap from cyber geek talk, I guess is the best way I can describe it, to business talk.
Right.
And that's the job of people like me that have been in the industry a long time, to be able to try to translate that and describe the risk. But the common things you still see is patch management, for example. There's vulnerabilities out there that are being exploited, and there's not proper patch management put in place to be able to fix those vulnerabilities, and then they're exploited. The greatest asset any company has, the greatest asset you have, the greatest asset we have at the Crypsis Group is the people, your people.
Yeah, for sure.
They're also your greatest weakness. And that is the one common denominator that I've seen in my industry for the last 23 years is human, vulnerability. I call it the human vulnerability aspect of it. The trust, we're naturally as human beings want to trust in nature. That's just our nature. And so we see an email come in that says, it's Chris, hey, it's Chris, but they don't look to see that your email's been spoofed. It's not really Chris. Hey, click on this real quick. And they click on it, and then everything, boom, everything occurs. Or open this attachment and enable this macro. So those are some of the, there's lots of information security foundational pieces that you still see falling off the wayside, because the truth is that I still feel, and I'll take that as an information security professional, we have not done our job to show our value to the executive leadership and make them understand that, hey, I need to take down the systems to do this vulnerability patch management. If not, we're going to probably get exploited, and this is going to be the financial damage we suffer because of it. That's the type of verbiage you got to get to from that perspective, but that's where we stand.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that, because it feels like there's like two audiences you really need to be able to educate. It's like you said, kind of the top-down audience, where there's got to be some, for better words, just like, here's the bottom line impact this has on the organization if we don't do this. And I mean, it's almost like, I don't know if you'd agree with this parallel or not, but it's almost sometimes like, insurance risk, where you've got to do a little bit of like actuarial work to make somebody understand like the true amount that's at risk. And if, one of these vulnerabilities is exploited, what that means for the organization, across. And again, it's not confined to IT. It's, this is going to be stuff that goes into the press. Past, future customers, clients are going to be aware of this. They're going to think twice about it. I mean, like, how do you guys even begin to wrap your head around quantifying that risk when you have that conversation with like high-level executive teams?
Until about 2014 for me, I did not do a very good job as a senior executive. I didn't have the tools in front of me to be able to quantify it. Didn't have the education behind me to be able to do that. And we didn't have the methodologies in the cybersecurity space to be able to do it. There are some methodologies out there. One of them is the FAIR Institute's methodology that allows you to quantify risk, to give them that dollar sign. For example, when I got to Army Healthcare, one of my foundational pieces of my cybersecurity programs is cyber awareness, just an educated organization where everybody has a piece of the cybersecurity program. I deputized everybody. Everybody was deputy CISOs, basically, and I needed to educate them. But I had a very hard. Yeah, I had a very hard time getting my senior executives willing to take time out of people's days to get educated, because that was taken away from the business itself in healthcare.
Right.
So what I did was I got permission to do a test run. I did a phishing exercise. And,
interesting.
I have over 120,000 personnel at Army Healthcare, and 48% of those personnel clicked on that phishing email. That was enough for me to start implementing a cyber awareness program. Well, what I did was I took that percentage and I basically said, okay, we're guaranteed one person is going to do something they're not supposed to do on an annual basis. And here's the potential financial impact from a regulatory standpoint, from HIPAA fines, from depending on what data was exposed. This is what it's going to sit there and cost us long-term and reputation-wise, and how we're going to harm our veterans and our Army personnel. And this is the cost to be able to mitigate it, because you can't eliminate it. You cannot eliminate human error, but you can reduce the risk of it. Got the funding for it, and within a year, our phishing campaigns, which we ran about every 2 weeks randomly, and in healthcare, doctors and nurses are happy clickers. They're busy, they're moving fast. It happens. You're going to have it. We got from that percentage down to 3%. That's huge. It's a huge reduction. So I've reduced the risk. That's where we have to get across the board, but you're still struggling with executives wanting to jump in and step outside of their comfort zone. And then we're still having to transition from cybersecurity professionals, where we've been in the IT world for a long time, and information security, to be able to take, okay, here's all my geek information, and let me translate into business terms that you can understand and that relates to you from a business perspective.
Yeah, and I would imagine, I mean, it's obviously different for different executives, but being able to give them the information in a way they feel comfortable being able to react to probably helps a lot, because you take them and you say, hey, we need to do these things, and it begins to feel like a bunch of jargon and they don't understand it. It can be difficult to kind of feel like a competent leader and provide any kind of input there. But as soon as you're able to provide, like, hey, here's our level of risk, or like, the sample phishing, like, here's what happened when we ran through this, like, really seems like it would be a big eye opener. Does that tend to be kind of a common practice for you guys whenever you do any kind of like assessment or analysis with an organization to do test campaigns and stuff like that?
We do definitely do test campaigns. One of the first steps you want to do when you walk into any organization is, there are different steps. You want to meet the business leaders, understand the direction of the organization, what direction they're going, because cybersecurity, information security has always been known as the Office of No. That's N-O. So we're trying to make everybody understand we're the Office of K-N-O-W. We're trying to educate, because it's all my job is to show you the risk. You determine if the risk is acceptable, if it needs to be mitigated, or we need to transfer that risk. And then that's my job to execute that after it comes down. We do that. We definitely come in and do a cybersecurity assessment. We can do phishing attacks to be able to show the weakness from that perspective, build out their cyber awareness program. But you really want to do an assessment against a cybersecurity framework, one of the industry frameworks out there, like the NIST cybersecurity framework or ISO or the CIS Top 20. And that way you can sit there and know, okay, here's our deltas. And then you can start doing that analysis and go, well, here's the risk associated with it. And you can come down to the reputational risk, financial fines, and who's really going to be, held accountable. The CISO sometimes is the one that's going to be on the chopping block if something goes wrong, but the CEO is the one that's going to have to be in front of that communication to their customers and to their clients and say, hey, we made a mistake or this happened to us and we're going to do everything we can do to fix it. And if they're a publicly traded company, SEC is going to look at them. There's a lot of competition in that direction. So it is a gap that information security is quickly gaining ground on. But what I still see in the industry through, just in general, is a lack to want to acknowledge there's information security is just as vital to the business as signing that next client up.
Right. No, absolutely. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to be to build the whole building and then have the bottom get, knocked out from under it. With the move to working remote, a lot of people are dealing with this, and you mentioned, phishing campaigns being, it seems, be interested. Are you guys seeing like a lot of kind of phishing attacks be on the rise with everyone moving into remote work?
Oh, it's been a huge increase in phishing campaigns and social engineering attacks. We've seen, I think our threat intelligence partners, they saw over 5,000 COVID-19 domains, fake domains created, malicious domains created as soon as the pandemic hit. And it continued to escalate. We've seen, especially with the stimulus checks and, the situation for, the United States specifically, we saw a lot of the stimulus check and IRS domains, malicious domains increase dramatically to be able to sit there and phish those campaigns. And we're seeing a lot with the current situation we're finding in the United States too, a lot of news, fake news links being sent out, Black Lives Matters and all this rioting or statues being torn down. And we're seeing a lot of different approaches from that perspective to be able to get somebody interested. Hey, let's click on it and see what we can find out. So no, they're inventive. The interesting situation with COVID-19 that I thought was there were a few ransomware groups, and there are different ransomware threats out there and different type of ransomware groups, actually publicly announced that they were not going to target healthcare. And if they accidentally hit a healthcare organization, they would provide the decryption keys for free. So maybe there's honor among thieves after all.
I was going to say, it's an interesting, like Robin Hood, like, all right, you're protected for now. Yeah. That's fascinating because I'd heard a lot anecdotally around people saying, oh, now that we're working remote, things that people would have just stopped by my office and asked for, we're getting emails by. And of course, there's a lot more of those like spoofed emails where it's like, hey, like I would have asked you this in the office, but can you click here and check this out? And people getting information stolen. With people needing to adapt to that, I mean, do you feel like there are certain kind of just best practices or maybe exercises they can follow to help either insulate or inform their teams of, how to be aware of these kind of phishing attacks? I mean, what kind of things did you guys do within Army Health to go from, like you said, I mean, that crazy percentage all the way down to 3?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll give you a story real quick, kind of, how we're seeing that remote workforce and in that same scenario you just gave be taken advantage of is we're seeing a lot of business email compromises. And what I mean by that is, everybody's pretty much moved to Office 365. So everything's, you can access it remotely, you can log into your web browser, get into your email account. And because of the rush to go remote, a lot of security organizations within companies, they just haven't caught up with the latest security trend, which one of those being a multi-factor authentication and putting that in place. So we're still using username and passwords to be able to get into our email. And the cyber criminals are taking advantage of that, and they're targeting a phishing email, and you'll click on this link and it'll pop up and look like an Office 365 login and say, hey, I need you to log in and check this out. And people put their credentials in, don't even realize they're compromised at that point. And then the threat actor will be in your environment without you knowing, going through emails, researching. I mean, they're extremely thorough. I'm not trying to give these guys too much credit, but they're good at what they do. And it's a business to them. And they'll go through and say, okay, this is the accounting department that I got into, and I see that they do wire transfers with this other company, and this is certain individual at this company all the time. They'll target that other individual at that other company. They'll compromise them, and then they'll set up a back and forth email conversation going back and forth and hide those emails with automatic rules to hide them when they come in. So the person sitting there doesn't see the response back. Oh, what are you talking about? Transfer to $200,000. I don't know anything about that. So we've had a couple of cases come up in the last couple of weeks, similar situations like that.
That's crazy.
Where wire fraud is taking place. And it's been $2 million, $4 million transfers of funding. And we've been called, they've caught some of these in time for us to get on with them in the instant response side of the house, engage our contacts with the FBI, because we're made up a lot of FBI, personnel, former FBI personnel, and get law enforcement and get Secret Service and be able to pull those funds back in before they leave the United States. And sometimes we just come in a little bit late. So we're seeing a lot of that. So some of the things that companies can do is the education piece is always key. Understand what's going out there in the environment. If you're a good cybersecurity professional and you got a good organization, you should be reading the articles. You should see the different news out there and just send little newsletters out. We used to send a newsletter out every month. Hey, here's what's in the news. Here's some steps you can take at home. Here's some apps that kids are downloading that are dangerous, and so the information they give away, and just try to offer something useful for the individuals. From a technology standpoint, take the extra step, do multi-factor authentication. You're going to eliminate your possibility of a business email compromise tremendously. And then when it comes to individuals and what they can do, if something just doesn't seem right, pick up the phone. And that's the best advice I can. I'm as bad as anybody else. I want to hit Slack up, or I want to hit an email and just go, and don't jump on the phone. But one of my clients from my previous role, where I was a CISO for a credit union, they publicized a big charity golf event, and had it on their website. And these cyber criminals were like, they had enough intel, they knew who the executive assistants were, and they went that day of that tournament, knowing that a whole bunch of clients and different folks they worked with were going to be at those tournaments. They targeted the executive assistants and said, hey, I need you to go down and buy 10 Apple iCards down for $100 a piece, and scratch the back of them and send me a picture. I'm going to give them to our clients here. And the executive assistant got all the way to the store. And at the last second, she finally listened to her intuition and called the CEO. The CEO was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So,
jeez. I mean, that's like, so many of these things, it is just like being able to kind of have some level of intuition for it, or like, that doesn't seem like the language this person would use. Or one that I saw recently, this was in Canada. A friend of mine does a lot of public speaking, and they had taken clips from him off YouTube, fed his voice into an AI, a voice synthesizer, and then sent like a voice note to somebody that sounded like him, and had enough like static overlay that it sounded like he was just overseas somewhere where it was kind of static. And he was like, hey, I need you to wire me some money, da 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 da. And like, thankfully his team is fairly educated and was like, this doesn't seem like the way he would do this. Let me go ahead and, reach out to him directly and give him a call? And he was like, "Oh, I've absolutely not done that." But he forwarded that over to the appropriate authorities as well. But the level and the depth, they'll go to for some of these like phishing attacks, it's only getting worse. I mean, the Outlook spoof pages and the way they basically identically model, the site so that whenever you go in and log in, you don't notice it unless you pay attention to like, oh, it's not, an M, it's an R and an N that are next to each other in the domain name. I mean, stuff like that is kind of your only chance to catch some of these things. So, I mean, beyond the, educational component, or I guess alongside the educational component, you mentioned, the newsletters, things professionals can be doing to kind of increase awareness and education. Are there other resources, be it online, things people subscribe to, publications or things to pay attention to just to kind of help them be a little bit more conscious of what's going on in this space?
There are a ton of great cybersecurity publications out there. I think for your everyday person and user out there, just thinking about the world is outside of work, what can they do in their personal life and change? If they're using Gmail or Yahoo or Microsoft, they need to look at increasing the security settings for that, going to a two-factor authentication or a multi-factor authentication, locking those down, because all our information's out there. Let's just be honest. There's been so many major data breaches in the United States alone in the last 5 years. And human nature is to continue to use the same password because, well, it's easy. Let's just be honest. I mean, the top password for 2019, once again, was 12345.
So sad. And
that's okay. I mean, I get it. And everyday users, they're trying to make their lives a little simpler, but, implement as much security as you can through your banking apps. They all have two-factor authentication nowadays. And I find it easier. All I got to do is put my thumbprint on my app now with my financial institution, and I log in. I don't have to worry about a password and a username. I had to go through the process to get to that, but it
all set up. Yeah, of course.
Took 3 minutes to be able to do that. Don't be scared of taking those steps and be able to lock that down. Go to your Wi-Fi router and change the default password that you probably have on your Wi-Fi router. That's just because it's easy for a cyber criminal just to figure out that information. And once they're on your router, they can see everything you're doing. And those are little steps from there. As far as organizations, the most successful I've ever been throughout my career and being able to change a culture to be more cyber conscious is it had to come from the very top. And not just a CISO. So I've always got my CEOs or my CEO to become the advocates of the cybersecurity program and say, this is important to me. And do 2-minute videos with your CEO and say, hey, this is where we are currently. Here's what our cybersecurity threat landscape looks like. We're being targeted by nation attacks. We've been targeted by cyber criminals. I need you to be due diligent on everything across the board. And just continue to educate that workforce. But also that cybersecurity element of your company needs to be looking at the ways they can sit there and continue to complement the business without impacting it, with too many restrictions, but trying to mitigate all the new risks that you're facing. And that takes time. And you got to understand that. What I would do if I was a CISO of a company again right now is I would reevaluate my entire cybersecurity program. I would do a risk assessment to our current structure, where we're at, discovered where the gaps were, what are the financial impact because of those gaps, and then get the support to mitigate them.
No, I mean, that absolutely makes sense. And I feel like a lot of folks are going to be, overburdened with that. Like you said, you've got a building that was built out specifically with, networks hardwired into each office, all of it coming through a firewall, multiple layers of protection. And now everyone's using their, Wi-Fi router or like a, coffee shop or like a hotel or wherever they might be. And they're connecting through these things and being able to kind of identify, where you used to have one location, maybe a couple locations you had to deal with. Now you've got as many locations as you've got employees. Like trying to get your hands around that can be pretty complicated. What if you were in that CISO role, or is there a way that, with like the Crypsis group, people think about how to prioritize those elements and like which ones do you tackle first, just knowing there's probably more than anyone can tackle? And, okay, great, this week we're going to take care of all of the problems. I wish we could, but how do you begin to triage some of that stuff?
Well, even, as a CISO sitting in a seat, or even as a virtual CISO now with the Crypsis group, or even, doing a standard just risk assessment with our clients right now, what we try to do is look at all the intel we get currently as a company, all the incident response cases we're responding to, and what are the elements the criminals are taking advantage of. We have kind of an advantage. I have more of an advantage now and with the Crypsis group than I did as a CISO of a corporation or Army Healthcare, because I've seen so many different industries come into the pipeline and different ways that they're being exploited. And because of that, we're able to take our assessments and look at those assessments and go, all right, you have, vulnerability patch management is still a weak spot, but it's extremely weak now because you have never patched or paid attention to your VPN and the vulnerabilities that come from it. And they're constant and they're being exploited by the cybersecurity element. A lot of people think, oh, I'm on a virtual private network, I'm good.
Right.
Well, there's still patch management, everything needs to happen with that. So what we do is we try to show from a risk perspective, here's your greatest risk. Here's the potential financial impact of them. And you just sit there and knock it out. The best way I've always described it is, I'm a Dave Ramsey guy. I've been a Dave Ramsey guy for a long time. And
Nice, yeah.
Dave Ramsey has the debt snowball, right? Yeah, and
right.
basically it's list your smallest debt to your greatest debt, and then you start tackling the smallest debt. Well, you flip it upside down in the information security world and go, here's our greatest risk. Management, here's the risk, here's the potential impact of it. I really do think we should mitigate this, but it's completely up to management, like I said before, and executive leadership. And then you start tackling that, and you do a cybersecurity roadmap. You be realistic. You only have so much resources, you only have so much time, and you only have so much money. So it's all about risk management. I will tell you, and I'll tell anybody and any client, any person in the industry, and I'll argue till I'm blue in the face, it's impossible to completely shore up your security program 100% without risk.
Right. Yeah. You can't eliminate it. It's all about reducing it. That makes sense. With something like an assessment, just knowing some people, great. They've got, somebody who's maybe in an IT role and they say like, all right, great. It still kind of gets couched there. Maybe they have not had a lot of like formal exposure to a lot of what's evolved in terms of just kind of information security practices. What types of assessments are available for people? Like what kind of, cost and time implications do they tend to have if you go through a process like that?
If you're going to do it in-house, you're going to need a bit of time and some resources to be able to do it. And you're going to be able to you need relationships. And that's the key thing that I think us as information security professionals, we've been in our little ball in our little area for so long. We haven't developed the relationships outside of information security. So when you look at a risk assessment from a security perspective, it can come all the way down to physical security. How are your cameras being managed? Are they being updated? Are they vulnerable at all? Are they connected to your network? HR, how's the hiring process? Are we doing thorough backgrounds? Are we onboarding, offboarding the right way? Because there's the risk, the offboard piece of it. Right. If it gets lost and we don't get notified somebody was released from the company, and they still have access to the infrastructure, they can come back in. So there's all these different elements out there. And depending on the size and maturity of the organization, there are different frameworks that you should probably try to do an assessment against. Gotcha. The great thing about bringing an outside company in, which I've always done through my career because I just didn't have the resources to be able to really execute a thorough risk assessment, is we're going to go develop those relationships. We're going to come in and go, I need to speak with HR. Well, why do you need to talk to us? And we explain to them, we sit down with them, we talk through the controls that we're looking at, and they go, wow, I never thought about that. So now you just got another advocate and somebody else is going, wow, this is really important while you're doing that. And then you're also getting people, and especially with the Crypsis group, we all have 15 plus years experience in this field. So you're getting our lens of this is what a program should look like for your size organization. Oh, and we have other clients that we work with and we know what their programs look like. So you probably want to try to be as close to them as possible. It doesn't have to be exact mirror because everybody's risk management, of course, appetite is going to be different. And so that's key. It takes time. We can come in, depending on the size of an organization, and give you a final report within 3 to 6 weeks. And then from there, with the report comes a roadmap. And you're able to see, here is our suggested roadmap. We can do a presentation with that final report. We can brief the executive leadership, the board of directors. And I tell you, I hate to say this because it's worked for me, even with all my experience. I brought somebody else in the room to say the exact same thing I've been saying.
We've all been there, yeah.
And everybody just loves that guy. Oh yeah, we need to do what he said. I'm like, really? I've been saying this for years. And so
now that the consultant said it, now it's legit.
Yeah, it's legit.
It's just like parents, like, you know, you can tell your kids till you're blue in the face. And then somebody else says like, oh yeah, you know, you should do it this way. And they're like, well, Dad, I learned I should do this way. Of course you did.
Exactly.
No, that makes a ton of sense. And one of the things I think is interesting, especially about where we're at with technology, is there was a time when like you could know a person that like whatever the world was doing in terms of technology, like give them a day or two, they could tinker with it, they could find it out. But now we go so deep in so many areas of specialization that, I mean, it's a lifetime of learning to be able to master and go to a certain level of depth that, you know, an outside organization probably has as a part of their bench. I mean, that's what we do in terms of like marketing technology. That's what you guys are doing in terms of, you know, security. So I think there is a lot of just benefit in being able to get that outside perspective, especially whenever the people attempting to, you know, exploit you are the ones that are going to go to, you know, the smallest, you know, crack and vulnerability in your infrastructure and be able to find that way in. You've got to have somebody on your side that can kind of help you get to that same level of depth in terms of protection, just to make sure you're kind of buttoned up, or at least you're aware of the risk, right? Like you said, you're not going to eliminate it.
I think the biggest mistake I've seen through my career, and we talked about trends, and this is one trend I didn't think about, but it kind of ties right back into that conversation, is I see a lot of very tech-heavy organizations. And what I mean, they're tech-rich. They've gone and bought every tool in the world.
Got all the gadgets.
But they have no idea what risk that tool is minimizing, if it is at all. They didn't realize the personnel it was going to take to be able to manage that tool.
Right.
And they're probably most likely not getting the full functionality out of it. So my recommendation to anybody listening to this is do that risk assessment. Do that assessment against a framework and then start categorizing your risk based off of what you consider to be the greatest risk down to the lowest. And then to make the determination if you are going to mitigate it. Is the mitigation, we need to hire somebody to manage a tool and it's going to reduce the risk by this much. And you just see that a lot of time. I see a SIM solution in an environment. They're expensive and they're constantly pouring tons of data out. But there's nobody there to take advantage of the data because the personnel were never there to be able to do that. So that is a very common trend. Oh, we got all these gadgets and tools, and then we'll come in and do the assessment. It's like, okay, yeah, you got all these gadgets and tools. Well, you bought these 3 tools, and they do exactly the same thing. And they're not addressing any risk because nobody's actually looking at the SIM logs. Nobody's seen them in 6 months. I had one client. It's one of my favorite solutions out there. It's called Varonis. It actually maps all the PII and PHI data in your environment. And does behavioral analytics on it. So it knows who's supposed to touch the data and not. And when somebody that doesn't supposed to touch the data, it alerts you.
Right.
Fantastic tool in healthcare, as you can imagine, knowing where your data is. I worked with a client, and one of the first things I walked in there, I was like, do you know your PII? Do you know where your PHI is? She's like, no, not really. I was like, well, and I kind of talked about some different solutions like the Varonis solution. Oh, we have Varonis.
Oh, geez.
Hey, you got Varonis? Yeah, but the guy that knew how to work it left like a year ago. And I'm like, oh.
Just sitting here, yeah.
So you see that a lot. And
you got the best lock, but the door is so heavy, we just leave it open.
Yeah, exactly. And the money, I mean, it's expensive.
Right.
And that's something we definitely help our clients out tremendously is come in and show, are you getting the return on investment? And are you getting the full functionality? Does this tool do the same thing as this tool or about 80% of what this tool does already? So you can maybe save some money here,
right?
Put it towards another risk or maybe bring on, new personnel or outsource your security services and try to give them some different options from that.
Yeah, really optimize the ways you're going about mitigating that risk and kind of looking at that, greatest to lowest, like you mentioned.
Right.
What's interesting, and so I know we've talked mostly about prevention. You talked about the 2-factor authentication and turning that on organization-wide. What I think is probably surprising to a lot of people is if you're not using 2-factor authentication, what you might see when you enable it. We had a client, and obviously, this was just them telling us the story, but, finally like gave in. I think they had a new IT director come in who was like, I can't believe we're still not using two-factor authentication, forced it in. And then suddenly started seeing a bunch of pings from different countries where it was like, hey, you're trying to log in. And they were like, hey, I'm not trying to log in. Why do I keep getting codes sent to my phone? And it's like, oh, so they've already been in our system for a long time. And it's like you said, I mean, the people that get in, they're not, it's not like something where they just, like they used to do in like the early 2000s. It was like, great, now we got your inbox and we're going to forward a spam email to everyone. Like, it's not going to be flagrantly obvious that they're in there. They're going to be in there and they're going to be patient and wait for an opportunity. And these folks turned on two-factor authentication, and that was when they realized, something was going on. But that can be kind of a level of awareness, or obviously, there can be a greater breach or some, kind of tragic event that makes you aware of this. But once you become aware, like once they figured out, oh, like they've been in our system, what do we do? Like, what do people do? Like once you realize like maybe we've been exploited or somebody's been in our system or we think we've had a data breach, a lot of people, I mean, even if they've got some pretty solid in-house expertise, are still kind of just like, do we hit the panic button? Who do we call? Where do we go? And I think a lot of people may find themselves in that situation, especially as this situation continues. What would you guys recommend, and how do people react in those situations?
We see it all the time. We see these type of cases constantly. It is surprising. And, to answer that, I want to give you an example of kind of where the threat actors are actually going from when they're in your environment, just to highlight that, and then I'll go back to that last question.
Yeah, for sure.
Is in the ransomware world, we're seeing the threat actors take a different approach. Because the industry is trying to catch up, ransomware would attack, they lock your systems down, and then we didn't have good backups. Now ransomware hits, and 6 out of 10 times we've got good backups, and we're like, oh, we're not going to pay you guys. We'll just throw our backups in there, get back up and run, spin back up, and we're good to go.
Right.
Well, the cyber criminals are going, okay, now I'm going to spend time in your network. I'm going to collect a whole bunch of data, sensitive information, proprietary information, and I'm going to slowly get it out of your environment, unbeknownst to you.
Right.
And then I'm going to hold on to it, and then I'm going to lock you down. And on the note, I'm going to tell you, you're going to pay X number of dollars or in Bitcoin, or if you don't pay by this date, I'm going to publicize your information. So they've gone to the element where they spend a lot of time feeling around and playing around in your networks without you knowing about it. A lot of times you'll never know about it. They'll steal the data out of the environment, and maybe they're not a ransomware gang. They just want the data. Right. And they take it and they use it. China is notorious for this as a nation. They built their nation on top of our tech. Back in the Desert Storm, there were two colonels with the army there in China. They watched Desert Storm. They watched our ballistic attack and how we sit there and marched across Iraq and be able to took it. And they knew at that point, they wrote a report and said, we're 20 years behind the United States. And this is the steps you have to take to catch up with them. And basically it was cyber espionage. And they have done that. They've stole from DOD contractors. You look at their latest fighter jet, it looks like the Joint Strike Fighter out of the United States. You look at their latest carrier that they just built, it matches the George W. Bush carrier group. They've stolen these credentials, and so it could be just steal the information or lock you down. So they spend a lot of time in your networks. What a company can do and what they should do is hopefully they have cyber insurance. They need to reach out to their cyber insurance provider. And on the cyber insurance provider, there'll be a panel of companies that can sit there and do forensic investigation and incident response investigation. We sit on over 60 panels with insurance companies. So we get called in with a lot of these, and we'll come in. We'll take those accounts. That's a give me. This account keeps trying to get logged into. We went to two factors, so we know somebody else has probably compromised that account before. Right. So we'll gather those accounts. We'll do our forensic investigation on it. We'll put some of our solutions on the endpoints to be able to do forensic investigation just to see if there's any RDP ports is there any data, is the threat actor moved through it? And we built a very detailed report and said, yes, threat actor was in your environment. They were in your environment logged in at these days from this IP address. Here's the data they took. Was there sensitive information in it? Yes, there was PI and PHI information in it. And then from there, with outside counsel involved, us as an incident response company and the organization itself, they can come out with the right strategy. Do they need to publicly announce anything? Do they need to go report HIPAA violations to OCR? Do they
Right.
need to, what are the next steps for them from a triage and remediation standpoint, and be able to also, hopefully, along with a lot of our clients, that's when my division comes in from a risk management perspective. We'll come in and do a quick snapshot and go, here's where the program is as a whole. Here's a quick roadmap, quick wins, low hanging fruit, things that we can do to mature the program. Here's the long road strategy roadmap. And then that company and our clients have the ability to say, okay, this is the direction we want to go. And then they can communicate that to their customers and clients and said, you're going to own it. There's nothing else you can do. We've been compromised. We had issues, threat actors in our environment. We know what data was taken. We're taking the proper, steps to be able to make sure our clients or our customers are taken care of. And here is what we're doing on the next steps. And that really comes a long ways when it comes to regulators too, and potential fines is, what are you doing now? What is your remediation steps? And you've caught it. You did the right thing. You got a forensic investigator involved. You know what data was compromised. You know what the gaps were, so you've closed those, but now you know what your other gaps are and you have a roadmap to improve. So
What are you going to do? Yeah.
Yeah.
Now let's happen to make sure, it doesn't happen again, and something like that, ideally doesn't happen again.
But don't ignore it. I guess it's yes, you're going to spend some money and you're going to have to pay your deductible to the insurance company, or maybe you need to pay out of pocket. And I get that, but you don't want to be that company that said, oh, this looks suspicious. I think this happened to us. I'm not going to worry about it. And then that stuff is publicized down the road that you were compromised. And the reputational damage can be tremendous. It could really sink you.
It does seem like, especially for it being either embarrassing for people or out of their comfort zone, or maybe just something that they have anxiety and don't want to deal with, and they just kind of ostrich and put their head in their sand. And I can think of no scenario where like the situation gets better by ignoring it in this case. We've certainly seen in a couple of cases where thankfully they were not clients of ours, but they were people that came to us once, like their sites got hacked or their databases were compromised. And then they just basically got a little note that the only thing in their, SQL database was send this much Bitcoin to this account and, we'll send this stuff back to you, or the offer to send like proof that they have the database. And, in a couple places, we didn't hear about that they didn't reach out to us until like months after it happened, that they were like, we thought maybe we would just shut this down, or maybe they didn't have access to other things. And then like, you don't know what else they have access to. And there are people that can help you with this. So it's like trying to disarm people from feeling really just kind of scared and defensive to be proactive and be able to do something about this.
Yeah, I think that's the key point is you got complete confidentiality with us when we come in to help. And we sympathize, and we're going to do everything we can in our experience and in these situations to help companies understand how they can sit there and dig themselves out of the hole that they're in a productive manner, that they come out sometimes even shinier than they were before. It's something but that initial fear, I completely understand it. And you don't want to lose business. You don't understand it, and it scares you, but take advantage of, the insurance that you have there to cover you. Take advantage of their contacts. Even if you don't want to go through the insurance company, call your insurance company or call your outside counsel and say, who would you recommend to come in and take a look at this? I have a concern.
Right.
Yeah, it's going to cost some money, but in the long term, I think it'll give you a lot of peace of mind.
Yeah. Well, it's also like, it can be like a lot of other things. So I don't know if you're a car guy, but it's like, all right, if you find out there's something wrong with the fuel pump and you begin to kind of take it off, and then you begin to realize like, oh, actually, there was something rattling around in the engine as well, and it could have blown, the whole cylinder apart. And yeah, thankfully, like the smaller problem ended up preventing a bigger one. Like I see a lot of cases where, okay, yeah, they exploited this and that was not great, but they could have gotten to all of this. And because they acted too soon, or we caught them here, they didn't get that. So be aware that, even if something bad has happened, it could have been worse, and it might still be advantageous of you to jump into action and be proactive about it.
Yeah, my last advice on that is, if you do have a ransomware note and you're unfortunately in that situation, engage the professionals. We have a team of folks. They get on with the threat actor and then negotiate. And we've seen cases where they've asked for $10 million, and we've been able to negotiate that down into the $100,000 range. So take advantage of the expertise you have out there, and understand that you're going to have that. So,
Okay. Well, good deal. Well, I want to be mindful of, I know time is, oh, okay. And we've got a question here from Doug. What do you do with senior managers who think they can create or have created a cybersecurity maturity model, the perfect design that will prevent all events, no challenge testing ever needed? Well, that's probably going to be an issue. So what do you do with, your cybersecurity folks who, think they're God guardians and they've got kind of the perfect system?
It depends on where you are in the organization, but I certainly would challenge that. I think what you would have to do in that situation is you're going to have to just have a one-on-one, frank conversation with them. It's just like I was talking to an up-and-comer in the cybersecurity space who was, looking at a case where a company is, makes billions of dollars a year, and they're like, oh, well, their maturity with the cybersecurity maturity model, well, there should be on a 1 to 5 scale, a 4 or 5 across the board. And I'm like, no, that's not realistic. First off, you don't have enough money to do that. Do you really need to do that across the board? So perfect design, I love to see it. You've got major corporations and large corporations, small mom and pops. I was behind DoD, for example, and I constantly had issues. I'm not quite sure what the maturity model might be, but if they're basing their maturity off of it, how are they basing it off of it? Are they allowing outside vendors to come in and pen test? Are they allowing outside vendors to come in and do an assessment? I believe that is the true test of what their thought process is from a maturity standpoint. Well, be able to challenge that from a third party. Always leverage third parties. Don't always use the same one. Every couple of years, switch it up. But your environment changes, and then your environment is going to tremendously change in 5 years. Now, where's the business going? Are they making acquisitions? Are we doing any, how's third-party management coming into play? Are we bringing new vendors in? So you've got to constantly be looking at the threat landscape down the road. There's not an easy answer to that. I really don't. Their maturity model, if they think that they're completely buttoned down, then my challenge would be then let a company like the Crypsis group come in and test whether or not we're completely buttoned down.
I feel like anyone who says this is perfect, no testing, it's kind of like the emperor's new clothes. It's like, if you don't think you need to test it, you probably very much need to test it.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Doug. I'm sorry I can't give you a great response to it. Everybody would handle things differently. I know I certainly would be looking for money to hire an outside company to sit there and challenge that maturity model.
Interesting. Well, thank you. And I do want to be mindful of time. I appreciate you lending us so much of it. I guess if I was going to boil down the conversation we've had to this point, if you're in an organization and you haven't done so already, it seems like some of the easy things you could do is, one, enable two-factor authentication across your team. That seems like a no-brainer if you haven't. Two, if you have cyber liability, you got cyber insurance, make sure you just connect with and kind of know what your game plan looks like if and when something happens, just so you kind of refresh that, kind of like practicing a fire drill. If you don't have it, sounds like probably make sure you're talking to your insurance broker and get it, or figure out how it's kind of packaged into your plan. And then, lastly, consider going through an assessment, whether you drive one internally or you reach out to, the folks at the Crypsis group to be able to set something up to really know where you're at. And I always kind of liken it to, American football, where it's, if you don't like the defensive lineup, the quarterback doesn't make up a brand new play all of a sudden right there on the field. They've got an audible planned, and you've got to have kind of time and space to practice and run through that when you're not being exploited or in a high stress situation to make the most of that. And that's, what you guys are experts at. So certainly don't be shy about reaching out to them.
Yeah. It's been a pleasure. I really enjoy it. Feel free to reach out to the Crypsis group anytime, or hit me up on LinkedIn. I'd be glad to answer any questions anybody has. So.
Yeah, and so here you go. If you want to connect with Crypsis is their site, and that's Heath's email address. So feel free to connect, and you can of course find us, EOCO and questions at as well. And then finally, just Heath, thank you very much for sharing the time, the expertise, the stories. It's just really useful to get such a great lay of the land from somebody who has such a wealth of experience in the space. Thank you for sharing it.
Chris, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Y'all have a good day.
Yep, have a good one. All right, we'll see y'all next.